are bright and shiny in my mind. You got me loving, hating, crazy indecision in my mind.
Welcome to the Fall Podcast, where the focus is on deer hunting, tips, tricks, tactics, and stories from across the Midwest. And now, here is your host, Aaron Blicey.
Welcome to the Fall Podcast. I am your host, Aaron Blicey, and this is episode number 54. And today, Justin, we have another Michigan native for 2 weeks in a row on here, so I'm super excited about that. I don't know if you're excited, but I am.
I mean, I am. It's just different the way you guys are doing things up there, and it's cool for me to hear the different management practices that you guys are using. And I know he's got a similar situation that he's working with, and he's got a little bit more room than you do to work with here. But you guys are just you're kind of doing the same thing. You're just trying to maximize the potential you see in your property and give the deer all that they could want. Hoping to get those shooters to come by, and in his case, maybe even inhabit the 5 or the 10 acres he's got there. But that's still a small piece of property. But I don't know. It's just cool for me to hear. Obviously, I'm on the public land side of things now, and I didn't have my own property in New York, but it just goes to show the fire in everybody when it comes to doing this kind of stuff, and just having your own piece of dirt to call your own and make yours.
Yeah, and like you said, we're gonna be talking about small pieces today, small acres. Matt's working with 10 acres, and here on the west side of Michigan, he's got about 9 more acres of timber than I do, but he kind of throws in some extra stuff that could hurt him in a way. He lives on the property, so there's a lot of activity around the property all the time. But also, he's done a lot of improvements in the last 4 years to get this property to where he wants it, and he's almost there to that final goal. And I'm excited to let everybody hear this episode, because every time I hear guys talking about this, whether they're from Michigan or not, small acres or whether it's big acres, it doesn't matter. I just get a grin from ear to ear on it, and maybe it's just because I love the management side and the extra that goes into working on a farm and putting your time in and really putting things where you want them to hunt it in the fall, and ultimately try to have that success that everybody's trying to have. So it's really cool, and like I said, I'm just excited to hear everybody talking like this and the way that they do things. I love those little tips and tricks everybody does, and Matt's got a lot of them.
Yeah, it's basically just looking at your property and deciding your plan of attack. You can say, if I do this, then this should happen, but there's no way to know until you do it. So it's it's
right.
You're constantly learning, constantly evolving. This worked, this didn't work, this seed worked, that seed didn't. Deer come from that way, so I'm going to plant this there, and it's it's a strategy thing, and we all know that when it comes to whitetails, it's all about strategy. But it's just, I don't know, it's just so cool to me to hear the different perspective, especially from these small parcel owners, like you and Matt. So I didn't get a lot of mic time on this one. I was just really tuned in and keyed up on listening to you guys go back and forth, and it was, I took a lot out of it. So I hope the listeners do.
Yeah, and you're just there for moral support sometimes too, and right. I really appreciate that.
Especially when I'm on my second week of Michiganders.
Yeah, exactly. You're getting, and every week. With. I'm with you every time.
Well, I'm outnumbered 2 weeks now, so it's these guys are just going to go off. I know it.
Yep. Well,
right.
I do want to go back to talking about how you kind of preface in this podcast about using the resources you have. And I think that's huge, and that's a good point, because we say it every time, and I know people are like, God, I wish you'd stop talking about it. But the 1 acre, I use a lot of resources in there and within that 1 acre to make it the way it is. But there's a lot of gray area that comes with that, a lot of things that you need to do and not to do to make that successful. And one is, don't hunt it all the time. Hunt it on the right times, and you will find success, because the more pressure in there, the more your success is going to go down. So I really like that you touched on that, and that maybe that's something we actually branch out into a coffee call about is just really using the resources you have at hand and maximizing all that to get the best success that you ultimately want.
Yeah, that's all you can do. You just do it your way. I mean, it doesn't affect anybody else but you. And
Exactly.
I guess in the grand scheme of things, it does. Like when you're manipulating your little chunk, if you're part of a larger scale, habitat, it does affect others. But I mean, ultimately, you're only making those decisions so that they affect you in the way that you want it to. And I guess at the end of the day, that's to either grow or attract mature deer, however you define that.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't have said it any better myself. So let's do a quick transition here. We do want to bring up America's Best Bowstrings real quick before we do get in there. We are running the promo code still, so it's Fall Podcast at checkout. So go to the website, order your strings and cables, type in Fall Podcast at checkout to get $10 off. Your order's $99 and over. And hopefully you guys go out there and use that promo code. It's there for a reason. And hopefully you guys need some new strings and cables, and you choose America's Best Bowstrings. So with that being said, let's kick this over to the interview with Matt, and we'll go from there. All right, we are back with another podcast, and today we have another Michigan native on the phone with us, Matt Zahl. Matt, how you doing, man?
Pretty good, Aaron. How are you?
Doing good. Hey, another mutual friend introduced you and I, and he's actually got a couple guests on here for us, and Sean Ferendorf was the other one, and now he said you got to get a hold of this guy. He's an animal. We need to talk to him. So reach out to you, and I'd like to get this started.
Yeah, that sounds good. Yeah, he's a good guy.
Yeah, well, a lot of people would say that. I don't know. I'm just kidding.
Yeah,
he's a good dude. Yeah. Well, cool. I mean, if you could kind of start off by introducing yourself, where you're from, where you grew up, and maybe what you do for a living.
Yeah, so my name is Matt Zahl, as Aaron said. I was born and grew up in the West Michigan area. Specifically, I was born and raised in Twin Lake. I currently live in Montague, Michigan, so just a little bit west of there. And my wife and I, we bought our house in 10 acres about 4.5 years ago now. And it was a great location. It was one of the first houses we looked at, fell in love with it. It had creek backside of the property line, really a lot of state land around the area, but not pressured a whole ton. I knew there was deer in the area, didn't know what caliber of deer, but for the house and the location, having access to water, I can walk out back behind my house and shoot ducks and geese. I can shoot deer. I've shot turkey. So it's really kind of a mini little oasis here. So we've been real happy so far. And I am a physical therapist by trade, so that's what I do Monday through Thursday. I luckily get a long weekend off. I don't work Fridays anymore, so that helps with weekend hunting trips and habitat management around the house and on the lease. So,
well, awesome. And I just want to kind of call you out a little bit because you actually really bought this for hunting land, right? Not to actually have a nice place to live. Is that what it was?
The funny thing about that is when we saw the listing, I saw 10 acres and I saw water, and I was like, okay, it's worth checking out. I mean, the house looked pretty good from the photos. Luckily, my wife fell in love with the house because she's pretty particular about what she wants in a house and, how the layout is, and she had all these ideas, and luckily they fit most of the agenda that she was looking for. And then obviously the property was pretty nice, and the access to the water was another key feature too. So I did luck out that my wife loved the house because I did like the property quite a bit.
Your first thoughts were, though, man, I could kill some good deer out there in ducks, though, wasn't it?
Well, I definitely saw the potential for the deer. I mean, I knew that the ducks and geese thing was they were always going to be there. I figured there'd be turkey there, and I actually didn't realize it until we moved in here. But there is brook trout and brown trout in the creek, and then it flows into the pond that's dammed up on the south end of it. And I've actually caught a 20-inch brown out of there a couple springs ago. So it really kind of has everything that a sportsman would want.
Yeah, you've really backed into the mother lode there, I'd say.
Yeah, seriously.
Only thing missing is about another 30 acres, and then it would really be a gold mine. But, we can't have it all.
Exactly. Well, you kind of mentioned your 10 acres. That's what we've been talking about. And you have a specific set of goals that you've been trying to do on this 10 acres. And one of them in which is to try to kill, like 130-inch deer on it. Is that correct?
Yeah, that would be the ultimate goal. As long as I own the property, that's going to be my goal, until I obviously, if I hit it, great. If I don't, it's just going to be a learning process of the do's and the don'ts and, what worked well and what didn't work well. I mean, I know big bucks can be taken off small properties and you see it every year, even in Michigan throughout the state. There are some, really nice. It almost comes down to, do you have the quality of the property as opposed to sometimes the quantity in a lot of situations too. So.
Yeah, and you've said you've had this ground for 4 years. You've lived there and you've hunted it for 4 seasons. What has been the progression? So, let's go through like year one. What was were you able to get a lot of work done on there as far as plots or, anything TSI or, anything in that realm? And kind of how did that first year shake out?
So the first year was really I would call it like a virgin year as far as habitat management. It's my first piece of ground that I owned. I messed around a little bit on my dad's property that he had, but never to the extent that I'm doing now. The only, I would say, kind of drawback and flaw to this property, and this was my hesitation when I bought it, was there was a really large clearing out towards the road and right alongside the long driveway. The house sits at almost the very back of the property, probably close to 800 feet off the road. And this big clearing, I would say, is 3/4 of an acre about. And it was wide open, no trees in it, just overgrown grasses, nothing, really upkept or anything like that in there, just native species. And I kind of was trying to figure out, okay, what should I do with this? It's right by my driveway. It's right by the road. There's about 30 yards of woods between the road and the edge of that plot. Well, what it ended up being the plot. So I decided that first year that I was going to trial and make that like a destination food plot source. So I ordered during the winter at our local county conservation district, I ordered 100 Norway spruce transplants, all about 12 to 16 inches tall. And I planted them in a perimeter all the way around, 3 rows of them staggered, a kind of offset up by the road, 2 rows going down my driveway, 1 row going down the woods, going to the north side, and then 1 row kind of on the off-shaped angle that it made to connect that rough-shaped rectangle. And then ordered 4 fruit trees. I got 2 galas out there and 2 Honeycrisp apple trees that kind of divide that longer rectangle, 3/4 of an acre-ish, into 2 halves. And that was the first big step that I did as far as bringing some different variety of trees and that stuff into the area. And then what I worked with the first year, I only had a walk behind tiller that I borrowed from my dad. And I think I probably tilled up 2 20-yard wide by 40-yard long strips. And it took me probably 6.5 hours to till it through twice and walking out there. And it was brutal, even though it wasn't warm. I did it in the springtime shortly after I planted the trees. And, at that time I didn't know really what I was doing, just knew I wanted to get some food in there, and this made the most sense because it was going to get the most sun and I wasn't going to have to do too much to it. Didn't even know about doing soil samples at that time or anything like that. I was really just winging it. And so went and bought some food plot seed off the shelf at the store. I won't mention what brand seed and all that good stuff. And it did okay. I thought it was doing great. Come to find out, it really wasn't doing that great. It was a lot of ryegrass filler seed and all this stuff, but I got deer in there. I got to see deer and I got to kind of get a little mini inventory as to what was going on.
Right.
Then it was that fall that I was like, well, I think I'm going to get serious about this. So I'm going to expand what I did till and then try and think about, okay, let's explore the food plot options out there. And that's when I got hooked up with Killer Food Plots and got in touch with Nick Percy, the owner there. And I can tell you that guy has been nothing but a wealth of education for not just me, but any of his customers. I think the reason why I've stuck with his product so far is I bought 2 bags of seed and he told me to give him a call if I ever had any questions. So I called him and he said he couldn't talk right then, but he called me back later. I think we spent probably 45 minutes to an hour. And again, he's talking to me, never hardly met me, doesn't know me from a hole in the ground. And from that moment on, like, the food plot game was changed for me. I learned so much in that amount of time. Did my soil samples, knew what I had to put down as far as lime and as far as, my micronutrients, and knew where my organic matter was. He talked me into doing soil samples and, the whole 9 yards. And I expanded those mini plots into a little bit bigger and had some pretty good success with growth that fall for fall plots. I think I did their Brassica blend, and I think I did I started a clover plot that fall, which then I kind of frost seeded into the next spring. And I hunted decent that first fall, not a ton, but I did hang a stand on that, what I would call that destination plot, what it is now. And then I had one kind of on a travel corridor connecting down from my creek bottom, kind of in a transition route to that. So in case, I didn't want to sit out on that big plot if I didn't have anything, consistently coming in the evening time or right around the rut.
So in that first year, you did a lot of improvements as far as the plots, and you planted a lot of trees, and I'm guessing those trees are probably for barriers, so you could kind of,
Yep.
Make your property feel almost bigger and more secure and safe for the deer. Now,
Yeah, the Norwegian spruce that I put in there, they're exactly right, as like a barrier and a screen. I love the annual screens that are out there. I wasn't sure or even aware of, the switchgrass or, any of the other perennial screens that exist out there. So I wanted something that I knew was going to be permanent. I knew was going to be a good windbreak. So I went with those. And then the apple trees was just something where, fruit trees are cool to have on your property, great source of food, good attractant. So it was kind of a win-win.
right. And then you said, you put a stand on that destination plot. So that first year, I mean, did you find any success with as far as, killing anything, or did you kind of define success as far as just wanting to be able to get deer in there in daylight hours and be able to have an opportunity?
Yep. The very first year I told myself, I don't need to kill a deer on my property at my house. I obviously would if the opportunity presented itself. I didn't know what kind of numbers I had as far as buck to does or how many deer were even accessible. I think the biggest thing that I was looking for was, like, can I get deer consistently in shootable hours, whether that be evening or morning, anywhere on my property, not just in the food. And I was successful that first year. I think between the cameras capturing them and between, me being out there and actually witnessing the deer, I probably would say that the most of the time I would see 3 to 4 deer, doe, small family groups and stuff like that. Some small bucks I did see on camera, never actually saw any in person that year when I was hunting, but, they were there during daylight hours, just, you got to work or, whatever else comes up. But I was never able to, not that I would have shot them, but it would have been nice to see, kind of that come full circle there as well. But I viewed it as a victory that first year, just, kind of going into everything blind, and as, a learning experience as you go.
Okay, so fast forward to the next year, your second year on the farm. Did you make any big improvements as far from year 1 to year 2?
Yes. Second year was a huge jump. I convinced my dad that, and I tried to convince him of this for years, but I convinced him that we needed to have a tractor. And so my dad having property of his own, and we both grew up cutting and splitting wood and doing that. So I convinced him that we should go buy one, and we finally found the right deal on a 38 horse 4-wheel drive Kubota with a bucket, and it came with forks, and we bought that, and that just opened up a whole new can of worms and opportunities galore. So when we got that, I ended up finding a small 3-point disc, about a 6-footer. And that made that destination plot turn into almost that full destination plot. So, I increased a ton of ground tonnage of food, just by having more accessibility to being able to work that ground. And, I can probably till that 3/4 of an acre, even if it's just a soft till, I can probably turn it over in about 30 to 45 minutes. So that was huge. But also, what was nice is I didn't really have any trail systems on my property. It was mainly woods. I had a small trail going out to one of my stands that was in the woods, that I set on a couple trees that had some major runways. But so I opened up a main trail system that went from all the way at the front of my property at the destination plot, kind of snaking and winding through as best as I could for just ease of getting the trail established, all the way actually to the back behind my property down towards the creek. And that trail still exists today. And also halfway between the road and down by the creek. I also made one small kill plot that year. I did all that stuff in the spring. I didn't get it planted in the spring, was only able to plant it in the fall, but expanded my food plots significantly by adding a kill plot, and then obviously increasing the tonnage of food that I put in that destination plot, and then creating that main trail that I put so I could get back and forth if I needed to without disturbing the woods or setting everything up too much. It was always cleared down to dirt, so you weren't trying to disturb the woods too much.
Okay, and then you said you put in that kill plot. How big was your kill plot?
That first kill plot I put in, because there wasn't any natural openings like the big one up front, I think it was probably, I would say 15 yards wide by 25 yards long. Just something big enough that, it might stop a deer to graze a little bit, or, a buck might come up on the edge to take a look. Wasn't big at all that year.
Now, going into that fall with that new kill plot, did you have a stand on that plot? Were you planning on getting in there and trying to find some success on that? Now, did you find success in year 2 on any of the, any portion of your property?
So the fall of year 2, I planted that kill plot, and I did hang that transition stand that I was just sitting on runaways before. I hung it on the kill plot, and 99% of my sits when I would hunt my property were on that kill plot stand. And I would only hunt my destination plot if I had something consistently coming in that I was willing to harvest. And I told myself that at that time, I still wasn't seeing a great number of deer on my cameras and in person. I maybe would see 6-7 deer would show up at one night on a camera after dark, and I'd see the occasional 3-4 come out within the last half an hour. Still nothing that I would feel super confident about yet, but I knew the steps were going in the right direction. And I had opportunities at does that year, but I just didn't feel comfortable with making that harvest yet, when I really didn't know. I only had one spring under my belt to see how many fawns were getting reared around every year. So I decided to give my house a pass unless a shooter buck would come in. And at that time, for me, a shooter buck was a 2.5-year-old coming through.
Okay. And that's something that Justin and I have done podcasts about with the does and the doe numbers. And you sound like you have a similar situation like I do on one of my farms here. And I don't want to shoot a doe on it yet because I just don't feel like my doe numbers are overabundant yet. You know what I mean? I don't see a lot of does. So until I start seeing what I think is too many does, I just haven't taken one yet. So I feel like you're probably in the same boat I am, and Justin as well. He feels the same way about that.
Yeah, and another big driving factor of that is I have state land probably within a 1/4-mile drive of my house. I live just south of the border of Oceana County and Muskegon County line. And I knew from that first year, once it hit rifle season, that the Orange Army comes out. And, I'm a rifle hunter. I get it. I understand. But I didn't know how that, harvest every single year during that 2 weeks was going to really impact. So, it could make or break the difference if, I take one of the does out that's having twins or something like that. And, 60% of the doe population dies during rifle season. I didn't want to start myself out into a hole. So that was kind of my, decision to also reinforce that no harvest of a deer unless it was a shooter buck that first couple years.
So going into the first 2 years on your farm, you haven't crossed paths with a shooter yet, and even on camera, correct? Is that correct?
Year number 2 actually is I got still to date the largest I would say scoring deer I've ever had on camera at my house. And the only reason I know the exact score of it is because my neighbor about a mile away killed it on opening night of rifle season. And it was a 146-inch 9-pointer. I had him on camera, I think 2 or 3 different times. One time in August, I about just lost my mind. I was like, Diesel Pete, is this my camera? Is this at my house? But it was out it was out on the edge of my destination plot. And then he disappeared in August, and he showed back up in October again. Didn't have any daytime photos of him, but it was real close to daytime. It was early morning, and he was on a doe. So substantially bigger than anything else I would have seen thus far on camera or in person. So that would have been, I would say, the first shooter that showed up. I don't think I had a 2.5-year-old that second year I had that year, and I don't know if he was 3.5 or he was 4.5. horns, would suggest, an older deer, but his body size, he really looked, at 3.5 to me.
Yeah. So it sounded like he probably wasn't living on your farm. He was probably living, a ways away from your farm and just using yours as a transition to other farms. Is that kind of correct?
Yeah. When that deer was shot, and it was my buddy's dad who shot that deer, that kind of led me to shape how I wanted to tackle the next 2 years at my house. That deer was shot at about 4:00 in the afternoon, just out moseying around looking for a doe. Big difference in his property from mine. His was substantially thicker than mine was. Mine had a lot of mature, like virgin timber, white pine, that some of them were 5.5 foot at the base in diameter, super big trees, shading a lot of undergrowth out. So I knew from kind of that point on that my big goal was going to be, all right, I've got a good kind of food source up and coming here. I know I have the water, the thing that I don't have, and I think it's probably hurting me the most for daytime deer activity and buck activity, is going to be the cover. And that's kind of where the last 2 years have been for me.
So going into year 3 and 4, then you're trying to improve your cover. Now, were you starting with hinge cutting and stuff like that, or was it more of like planting more trees and trying to do some any other sort of barrier? Or
well, year 3 I kind of started to explore my options. I bought Jim Broker's Extreme Deer Habitat book and learned a lot about felling trees, a lot about hinge cutting, did a little bit with the hinge cutting, but then started to think about, do I need to do a select cut on my property with the large trees that I do have, the amount of poplar that I do have on the property? So I started calling around to some foresters and to some loggers, kind of getting some ideas and some bids, and eventually settled on a local guy from the Hesperia area, so not too far from here, just a little northeast. And just a 2-man operation, him and his son, but they do it privately, and they take your timber bids to as many different mills that are interested, and they get you the highest price. Worked out pretty well. So they came in, and he educated me a lot. Originally I thought, I'll just take all those big pines, but he really understands kind of the age structure and class that you need in the woods. Even if you want to make a good deer woods and make it thick and nasty and all that stuff, you still need those different age structures. They all serve a different purpose at different seasons, different times of the year. So I harvested about 50% of the huge white pines that I had. Every poplar I had on the property that was 10 inches in diameter or bigger, I took. And they took a few select hardwoods that were kind of veneer furniture grade. And that kind of was I would say, I'm not trying to skip ahead of year 3. Year 3 was just, more of an expansion of what year 2 was. And then going between the spring or the end of, I would say, year 3 into year 4 last season is when I did that select cutting.
So then, you're through year 4, then have you been able to kill a deer yet, or Are you still just trying to get that right one?
Yep, I killed an 8-pointer actually the year before I did the hinge cutting, or the year before I did the select cutting. I'm sorry, and I did. So kill
year
him.
3.
Year 3. Yep, I did kill him off my destination plot. I had 4 or 5 pictures of him coming in to my food plot at night with a 5-pointer in that last couple weeks of September, first week of October. The wind was right, and it was coming out of the north, and I, believe it or not, I got out of work. And I drove home, and I'm like, you know what? Cold front pushing through. I'm going to go sit on that plot. That buck's going to come in tonight. And I'll be danged, I saw the most deer I ever have on a sit. I think I had almost 12 in the field at the same time. By the time that buck came out, I had a little button buck come out first, and some does, and heard another deer coming. Doe came running out in the field, and then that 5-pointer that I knew that 8 been running with. And I'm like, well, no 8-pointer. So I'm sitting and watching them, and then sure enough, probably last 5-10 minutes of light, I just hear that distinct kind of walking. You can tell when that buck's, walking, breaking brush coming through, and I'm like, oh gosh, that's got to be a buck. And I looked out of the corner of my eye as he crossed my driveway, came right in where I wanted him to, and I just looked and saw that beam and tines, and I knew it was either that 8-pointer or a different 8-pointer that kind of split off from each other over the summer. And I let him get out in the field about 10, 12 yards and gave him a little meh, and shot him at, I think it was 12 or something like that. And he went about 60 yards and died between my destination plot and my kill plot.
Oh, nice. So how big is your destination plot then? Is it like an acre, or how big are you working with?
It's roughly, I would say, 3/4 of an acre. Probably just raw space, and then with the trees that I planted around there, and then the apple trees in the middle, and as all those trees are getting bigger and kind of infringing on it, I probably lost a little bit. I'd say, maybe closer to 2/3 of an acre now is what I'm working with there.
Okay, and then around the plot, did you align it with all those trees that you bought? So is the plot
Essentially, it's kind of, it's getting to be a little more uniquely shaped as those trees are growing, but it was pretty much a rectangle that didn't have one full complete side. Like you took a small square out of one of the corners, so it kind of had a little notch, like a Tetris piece almost in it. And but putting those apple trees in there, and then putting those spruce trees all around the outside really gives it a little bit of a shape and a little bit of texture to it as well. I also have on the north side of the property, where I have the majority of the woods, I have a lot of big overhanging kind of oak branches that I've kind of kept trimmed at proper heights for licking branches. And there's always, half a dozen scrapes along that whole north edge of that plot every single year now.
Awesome.
So, yeah.
That's pretty cool. And so year 3, you kill this 8-pointer. Was he to your standards at the time? Like, how old was he?
Well, to my standards, I would say no. I had previously thought that deer was a 2.5, and he actually was a 1.5 year, large 1.5 year, I would say, rack. Nothing to brag about, but he probably was a 15-inch inside spread, but shorter tines, maybe 5-6 inches long, but didn't have the mass of a 2.5. And I knew as soon as I walked up on him, body was not a 2.5. And I was excited that I was able to do this and put this plan together. And I don't consider myself a big trophy hunter by any means. I would say in the last few years, just really getting into that, only shooting that mature animal deer status. But to me, it was a victory, and it was probably one of the happier moments of my life, just accomplishing what I sent out to do. My rule at my house, like I said before, 2.5-year-old, 8-pointer bigger. So I felt successful in what I did. Since that point, I've definitely said, well, I can do this. So, let's not lose sight of the goal and shoot for the moon here for that big mature whitetail.
Yeah, and I've said it before. It goes in stages. You kill these deer that you set your goals every year, or and it could be the 1.5 years, then it jumps to 2.5, and then 3.5, and it's you got to go into stages. You can't kill a deer you don't have on your farm. So
no, and the funny thing about that is I kind of was having some pressure, I think, from my wife, because we were going into almost 3 years where I could have been shooting at least a doe every year. And she looks at my credit card bill from the food plot, seed and fertilizer, and she can buy this tractor and implements and stuff. And she's like, eating clean is starting to be pretty expensive. I said, dang, if I don't shoot a deer this year at the house, I'm really going to catch hell for that.
Yep, you got to justify it all too to the missus.
So, yeah, exactly. So that made peace a little bit easier.
And that's kind of easier in Justin and I's world, because we get a lot of this product for good deals, or so we don't have to deal with. Well, we still do. I do anyway. Like, it's like, well, do you really need that? Well, no, I really don't, but I want it. I want a new bow.
Right. Yeah, do I need it? Probably not. My old bow drives nails, but do I want it? Oh yes,
exactly.
Sure.
And as I get older every year, I'm like, well, I start thinking, my dad was always the guy that's like, if it's not broke, don't fix it. So I'm starting to kind of inherit that a little bit. I can feel myself, but still, man, I like having nice tree stands and nice bows. And so it's like,
I would say this is the industry where you do get what you pay for the most part. I mean, if you pay for a good quality product, that's going to last you a long period of time. I just upgraded bows this past year, not to get off topic, but my previous bow was almost 12 years old. And I mean, that was what I killed 95% of my bow bucks with that I have up until this point in my life. And I mean, it shot just as true as it did with the last route that I shot on the state land as it did with the very first deer I killed with it. So
that's awesome. Well, cool. So then you went into year 4.
Yep.
And this last year, now, how was your success on year 4?
So year 4 would be the fall. I would describe year 4 as the fall after I did the select cutting. So that kind of took place in the late spring, early summer, a little later than I wanted to, but actually he did me a big favor. He was booked out, and actually he just cut my property between jobs. I think they were in and out select cutting my 10 acres in probably 2.5 weeks.
Okay.
Super quick and really efficient, minimal collateral damage. And knowing that I was going to get this property cut, I didn't have very high expectations for, first of all, buck numbers, and then second of all, maturity of bucks, because I knew I was going to open up that property quite a bit, and I knew I was going to be spending a lot of time, because he cut my property later than what I was ideally hoping for, on cleanup. But that select cut led me to buy a root grapple for my tractor. I did that, and my dad and I welded up a quick connect for it, because I have a Kubota quick connect. I don't have the quick connect like the skid steers do, but I wasn't going to go buy that plate for an extra $500-600. So got the root grapple all set up and the third function valve on there, and that made cleanup of those tops. And just, I mean, it's amazing how much just another $1,200 worth of implements just saves you on your back and your time. I mean, I was out there with my chainsaw sweating my butt off while I watched my neighbor with his tractor. He came over across the creek. Luckily, he's such a good Samaritan, and he had a grapple on his Kubota, and I was like, well, this is dumb. Why don't I have one of these things? So
Yeah.
I had to beg the wife for, hey, I think this is going to make it, the cleanup a little bit quicker, and you'll get your woods back to looking a little bit more, ideal. So she got behind that, and that was the biggest purchase, and probably the most important purchase out of everything that I've done so far for Habitat. It really does everything. So I busted my butt, I think, every day on the tractor as soon as I would get out of work to get as much of the tops cleaned up as what I thought was appropriate. I still left some in certain kind of strategic locations. And then what I was left with was about, instead of one trail that went from east to west from the front of my property to the back, I was actually left with about 3, which branched into a 4th from the skidder trails. And then I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. I hunted, I saw deer, I had opportunities at does, small bucks I had, but nothing shooter wise. I had one shooter on the camera this year. I'm pretty sure he was shot opening day of rifle season, because he moved through my property at like 8 a.m. that day, heading towards the state land. So I'm sure he got his ticket punched, because I never saw him after that. But I was expected to, I would think, see a decline in the deer, just because of the drastic change that I put the property through at that point.
Were you correct on that? I mean, did you not see a lot of deer this last fall? And how did it change the movement?
The movement was a lot more nocturnal, just because of the opening up of the property. And I would say I saw probably, if I'm doing an inventory of how many deer are coming into my destination plot at night, by the fall of the 3rd year, I counted my record number of deer in my food plot, and that was 19 in that small, 2/3 acre. I think last year the most I counted was about 12 or 13. So still not terrible, but not nearly the numbers that I was seeing before I got the property cut. And I had a lot more daytime sightings in year 3 than I did 4. But in my mind, this was all for the bigger picture. I get those poplars cut, I get those pines cut, I get a lot more sunlight to the soil. Those popples are going to shoot up, all kinds of popple shoots. And then that brings me kind of into this year's springtime situation. I'm going to bring in about another 50 to 100 conifers to kind of plant sporadically throughout the property in between those skidder trails. I plan on leaving those skidder trails as kind of bare dirt cleaned out, and roughly till those in and plant those with just some kind of either a cereal grain, or try and work some clover in, or some chicory, depending on how my soil does or how long it's going to take to get it right, as basically grazing corridors for those deer to just constantly feel like they can move. And then to both sides of those trails provide that cover with those new saplings and that new growth to regenerate, as well as those conifers. And I kind of came to that conclusion that I had Nick Percy come out and do a little mini property consult on his way up north to do another one. And I talked to him about hinge cutting and, now that I got my property select cut, that was another reason why I didn't hinge cut a ton earlier, is I knew there was going to be a lot of collateral damage from that select cut, and I didn't want to ruin a bunch of trees that I just hinge cut and basically make them turn them into firewood.
Right.
So that was a big reason why I waited. So I kind of talked to him, where should I hinge cut? What should I hinge cut? And he said, you really only want to hinge cut the trees that are only hinge cuttable. If that, I don't know if that's technically a word or not. He showed me a lot of the trees that, smaller diameter trees. He talked about getting paracord. And what he does on a lot of his properties is he'll tie up those trees off with paracord and anchor them to other bigger trees, or drive, big stakes in the ground. And you really actually turn those trees into, maybe a 7 to 10 year survival rate with a hinge cut, maybe more if you're, pretty good with the saw, but, basically keeping them alive forever. And eventually they kind of develop that memory of that growth pattern, and you can kind of unhinge or untie those things, and they'll continue to grow in that semi-horizontal or horizontal fashion.
Yeah, and that's something I did on my farm this last year. So coming into this last fall, basically last winter. So what I did is a lot of those smaller trees, I was experimenting with the paracord, and I bent a lot of trees over and paracorded them to like other trees, or like you said, put a stake in the ground and did that. And I actually had bucks bedding in and around them because I just made little pockets for them. But I did find that in a lot of the hinge cut that I did, I always, read and saw people say that you need to put like a barrier over, like the deer want to feel secure underneath things. Well, that is so far from the truth on my farm. I built 2 big hinge cut areas where they actually had like basically canopies over them, and they did not want to go in there at all. They actually bedded in the middle of all my hinge cut with hinge cut around them, but nothing over them. And all the bucks, I mean, I had a variety of ages, anywhere from 3 to 4 years old, 2-year-old bucks. They'd all bed in the middle, like in the wide open, but with hinge cut all around them. So it wasn't like tight on them, but they still felt like they could get out of there if they needed to. They can't see around. They only can see probably 20 or 30 feet, but they can smell from every direction. So, yep. And I've made trails going every which way for them to be able to exit. So that's one tip that I definitely have for people wanting to hinge cut is don't think that you need to put a barrier around the whole deer and think they're going to get into this little hole and just kind of tuck themselves in. In my opinion, that does not work, and it has not happened very well for me anyway.
No, and I would agree 100%. Not from the aspect that I don't have the experience with the hinge cutting as much as you do, but I would say the barrier aspect. I really shot myself in the foot when I was clearing a lot of those tops from those big pines. I was just going for as quick as I could get the desired, woods to the way I wanted it to be. So I would move a lot of that stuff and almost create like a soft fence on my one northern border of my property. And I had a couple openings in there, but after doing some thinking about it, those deer, they don't want to get in like they're herded into a cattle fence and think like, ooh, I only can run east to west. I can't really do too much north to south running. So as soon as I get a little more snow melt, my big spring project here before I start to get some perennial growth back into my plots is going to be to take that grapple on my chainsaw and actually probably take out a section that's 3-4 foot wide in that brush and in that brush pile barrier fence, probably every 10 or 15 feet. So it gives them those options. So they still get some cover, they still get some security, but they have options going every which way. So that's going to be on my immediate project. I'll probably tackle a little bit of that this weekend if the weather cooperates.
Yeah, well, cool. That's sweet. I mean, that's really cool to see what you're doing on 10 acres. I mean, you've done a lot of work, and surprised you're still married, to be honest with you.
Well, and the thing that I forgot to mention earlier too, year 3 before I got a select cut, and this was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back, I had my second biggest scoreable buck on camera, and he came in with actually 3 or 4 others in the same weekend, and I don't know what it was. It was that first full weekend in November, and sadly I wasn't home. We have a bow camp weekend up in Alpena that I was at, and I came home to check my cameras, and it was just sick to my stomach that I was gone. I had a 2 different 9-pointers, an 8-pointer come on, and then a drop tine 10-pointer with about a 6-inch drop coming off his main beam, growing straight out like an eye guard, and just a gorgeous looking buck. had him a couple times on camera, similar to that other big one I talked about earlier. And the most ironic situation ever, you're never going to guess who killed that buck on the second day of rifle season. The same guy who killed that 146.
Ah,
Oh
the rich get richer, man.
So it was the most ridiculous thing because I didn't show hardly anybody a picture of that buck just because, I mean, it's a drop time buck. What the heck, you know?
Right.
And all of a sudden my buddy texted me when I was up north for rifle season, and he says, dude, look at this buck my dad just shot. And he shows me a picture of it. And at first I just looked at it and I was like, dude, that's a nice buck. Then I saw it had that, because it was facing me, and I saw it had that eye guard, and I was like, you have got to be shitting me. Like, this is unreal. So then I showed him the trail cam picture, and he's like, no way you had that buck on camera. And I was like, yeah, multiple times.
Man.
So, but I've actually got to, I mean, with him being a buddy, I've actually got to go to his dad's house and put my hands on those two frames, both the 9-pointer and then that drop time 10. And yeah, it's good to know that at least somebody, I would say not necessarily deserving of it, because I mean everybody's deserving if you harvest a deer, but somebody that I know harvested those deer, so I still get to at least, you know, see what they look like in real life, you know.
Yeah, exactly. So let's transition a little bit here, going from your 10 acres. Now, you do have a lease as well in Michigan, and I found this pretty interesting because, you know, growing up in Michigan and everything, you don't hear of a lot of guys going out and looking for leases in Michigan. Now, I think it's one of those new things that people are doing, and I mean, I'd like to find a lease in Michigan, actually, if it was the right piece. And it sounds like you found the right piece. Can you kind of paint the picture for that lease and you know, where it is, and well, yeah, I guess you don't have to say really where it is, but
Yeah.
you know, what it is basically, and how you came to acquire it.
So yeah, the lease is I actually lucked out. I'll start by just, you know, kind of getting into the lease, and then I'll talk about kind of logistics of where it's at. I hunt with a good buddy. His name's Craig Watson, and we do, you know, we fish, we hunt turkey, deer, duck, goose, you know, whatever. And we always were saying, you know, he has a similar situation, you know, small acreage at his house, you know, wants that opportunity to shoot those big mature bucks. And we figured the best way to be able to do that on a consistent basis is going to be if we picked up a good lease. But we just, you know, we didn't know what was available, or, you know, how hard it was to look at leases in Michigan. And, you know, you run into some that are crazy priced, and they only want you to set foot on the property between October 1 and, you know, January 1, and then you're just rolling your dice and, you know, hoping for the best. And I got a call from him out of the blue one day and says, you know, you're welcome. And I was like, well, what is that supposed to mean? And he told me, I just got us into a great lease. And I'm like, first I was like, well, you know, are we already in? Because I don't even know what the heck it is. And he started telling me about it, and, you know, it was almost instantaneous. I could just hear him saying, I just walked the property, and it is some of the best whitetail ground that I've walked in Michigan or out of Michigan. And I'm like, no kidding, really? And it ends up being, luckily, it's only about 30-minute drive from my house due north. It's in Oceana County, surrounded by a lot of big private parcels. One of the guys about a quarter mile away, he bought 240 acres, pretty close to the 120 that we have. And he's a big QDM guy. He's had it for a couple years, shot a couple nice bucks off it back-to-back years. I think his were both above the 140 class. So good deer for that area, good deer for Michigan, and, you know, in my opinion, anywhere. They're, you know, big mature bodies and stuff you want to see. That lease is kind of the best of all habitats, from what the best way I can describe it. There's a southern square 40 that used to be I would say, homestead back in the late 1800s, which has since kind of fallen down and collapsed. That's kind of where we will park if we're going to hunt that South 40. And it's basically an overgrown apple orchard. The guy that started that lease, he kind of explained and gave me a little history when I came on board. And he showed me the aerial, and you can see the amount of growth. That aerial photo is probably from 10 years ago, and the amount of growth and thickness that has come up in all the surrounding structures is amazing. How much more cover there is now than what there was before. And I mean, it was good before, and it's only getting better as kind of we push on. As I was saying, my buddy and I are on the lease, and there's actually two other guys on that lease currently right now. which, some of you may think, oh, 4 guys on 120, that's kind of tight quarters, but there's rarely a time when there's 2 people hunting on it. It's usually one person goes up at a time, not because that's our rule, but just because everybody's got different times off. I mean, you may all want to hunt the same time, but everybody's got work, jobs, families. I actually am fortunate enough that I live the closest and have the most flexibility. Most of the other guys are driving almost an hour and a half to get up there. So it's not as easy for them to just pop up real quick and go,
Right. And so, getting into the lease, are you kind of skeptical about, it's Michigan kind of thing, and you're just like, well, I guess I'm going to try it for the first year. Like, how was your thought process going into it?
I was super skeptical, and you hit it right on the head there. We got offered this lease really late into the season. I want to say it was almost the middle of August, maybe a touch later, and I was just my mind is already made up. I had my state land spot scouted. I got my house going. I'm just like, oh, this is a whole new monkey wrench. And I was like, I don't have a bunch of stands I can offer up and hang up. And luckily the guy that's had the lease the longest, he has on that lease probably about 20 stands that have been hung and set all ready to go that anybody can use. And it's like, well, that's kind of a cool situation. And then
changes the ball game a little.
It changes the ball game, yeah. And then I start to ask, well, what are the rules? What's the do's? What's the don'ts? What do you got? How serious are you guys about cover scents or no scent and no scent showers and all that hoopla that's out there today? And he says, well, 8-pointer rules are 8-pointer or bigger is basically our biggest rule. Mature deer. So mature deer for us this year, we all kind of came collectively together and had a little vote, and we decided that this year we wanted to have it 2.5 years old or older. If you felt like you wanted to harvest a 2.5, you could. They see, and they showed trail cam photos from the past, 3-4 years. They have age structures all the way up to what I would say is a 5.5, potentially a 6.5 deer that they nickname Baby D, and just a huge buck. Buck of a lifetime. Seen them on the hoof a couple times when they've been in the stand. So I knew the potential was there. After walking the property, even just a little bit that I did prior to season, I decided it was worth the money and worth the investment to at least give it a trial year. And that's basically what my buddy and I decided to do when we agreed with those other 2 guys that we were going to sign with them and we were going to pay the price for this year. Now, I will say the advantage that we have with this lease, unlike most of your hunting leases, is this is a 12-year lease for us. So we can go up there 12 months out of the year. I could turkey hunt it this spring if I wanted to. The south branch of the Pentwater River is on there. I could go up there and fish some trout, mushroom hunt, any of that kind of stuff I want to do. And obviously the advantages for a 12-month lease for developing habitat, putting in food plots is, you can't even, weigh that out.
Right. So that's huge because you're not only paying it for like a September to January, you're paying for it for the whole year. So you and your family can all enjoy it the whole year, like you said.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And the lease dictates it's you, your spouse, and or any of your kids are allowed to use that property, to hunt that property, for what it has and what it offers. So, in my mind, I'm thinking, well, this is a guaranteed way. I had a son about 14 months ago now, and I'm like, you know what? As hard as it is to get kids into hunting nowadays, and you want that success, and that's the whole purpose behind developing my house. But man, if I got a lease like this, I guarantee he's going to see deer every sit, and he's going to see multiple deer. And what more way to get a kid jacked up about deer and deer hunting than if he's seeing, deer, and just educating
a lot
him
of
on that, and educating him on, oh, they're moving like this, so they're, we got to be quiet, because just educational opportunities and getting those kids excited about it is endless, in my opinion.
Yeah, for sure. You really hit the nail on the head there. And the thing is, as kids, they just don't seem like they're interested anymore like we were as kids. I like every one of my friends when we were little was interested in hunting and was brought up in hunting. You know what I mean? And it's you see all these kids now, and I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's the social media, if it's the video games, or what it is, but they just don't feel like they even want to be outside doing anything. So it's nice to see that you're able to work that property into your everyday life with your family. So that's really cool too.
Yeah, we actually just went up, my wife and we put our son in a little backpack hiking carrier, and we went up for about hour and a half shed hunt up there this past weekend, and he was just loving it. Every time he'd stop, he'd start kicking you in the back and kind of yelling and screaming at you like, "Oh, keep going, keep going." And,
That's
unsuccessful on finding sheds, but it was a good time up there for sure.
Yeah, and just to get outside right now, after being the long winter that we've had, and just it's nice. But going forward now, so is that basically the extent of all your rules, or did you guys have more rules within there about anything like checking trail cams on a certain day, or anything like that?
So it was kind of a rule decided that, for the most part, we wouldn't check a trail camera unless we were passing that trail camera on our way to go hunt. And, you'd pull a card out, put a card back in, and then you're not making any extra trips. You're only leaving a minimal amount of scent. The one other big rule is, when you have 20 stands up there and you have 4 guys, everybody's probably wondering, well, how do you decide who hunts where? And, the nice thing about it was when I said that guy put up those 20 stands as community stands, for the vast majority of them, I would say 90% of them, they were. A couple of them he did reserve for him and his kid, but you know what? I wasn't going to be picky about it in that first year. I'm like, we can always talk about that stuff later on. And so the unwritten rule was we all had a group text, and, there wouldn't probably be 2 or 3 days that would go by, if that, where we would be texting who's hunting this weekend, who's hunting tonight, cold front coming through, yada, yada, yada. And it was understood that it was first come, first serve. If you said, I'm hunting this weekend and I'm hunting the Apache stand, well, then since you said it, you get the Apache stand. Or I'm hunting the point tonight, then you get the point. So even though 2 of those guys had a lot more seniority than my buddy and I, they kind of, it's fair game. And that's, and that's the way it should be in a lease. Everybody's paying equal amounts financially. Everybody's bringing the same thing to the table,
Yeah, and it's good to have some bylaws or rules as well. I mean, just so everybody's on the same page, and there's, at the end of the day, there's no lost friendships or no bad blood, because it could get, the thing is with deer hunting is there's a lot of people out there that everybody owns the deer. You know what I mean? That's my deer. Like, that's my stand. You know what I mean? And there's a lot of people that lose friendships and everything over deer hunting, and it's like, man, like, come on, like, let's just all have fun here, and it's it really, it makes me sick sometimes to think about it. And I see it firsthand with some people that I know very close to me, and it just bothers me so much.
It really does. And you hit it exactly right. Like, everybody thinks they own the deer. I mean, I had 2 of the nicest bucks I've ever had on trail camera shot. And just because I had them on camera, they're not my deer. Those deer roam. I realistically understand I only had 10 acres. The likelihood that deer was going to live on 10 acres with the way I had it set up at that time, non-existent for a chance. But would he pass through maybe chasing a doe? There's always that chance. But there's always that chance he's going to run a mile away and get shot too. So, that's why it's hunting, and, you don't got him tied down and waiting for you.
Exactly. And I think Justin can attest to this. He's been hunting public land, and you kind of have to have an open mind when you go into public land. I mean, he can vouch a little more on it, but nobody owns the deer out there, really.
No, it's like you guys are with the Orange Army up there during gun season. It's how it is here in bow season.
And that's exactly right. I mean, up until this lease, and even when I had my property, just my house, I mean, I was primarily, I would say, a public land hunter. I hunted public land at our deer camp in Alpena, and I hunted public land most of my life in bow season. The 3 mounter bucks that I have shoulder mounts on my wall, 2 3.5s and 1 4.5, all public land 8-pointers. And it's just, you gotta get a whole new mindset when you take off into that public land set, and you gotta almost kind of wear your emotions on your sleeve and just brush them off. And somebody comes storming in, and messes up your set. It's like, okay, well, on to the next one. Gotta go a little deeper in, or.
Yep. And how many years have you been hunting this lease then now?
Last year was the very first year of the lease. So we literally just hunted it last year. I saw more deer probably last fall than I've seen maybe in 3-4 seasons combined. Like, just an astronomical amount of deer. We had a lot of intentions to shoot. The other rule I would say too, it brings me back to when we're talking about shooting deer. For every 1 buck you shoot, they like to ideally shoot 2 does. That's kind of where they figure their ratio is at as of right now. And as we hunted there and more eyes in the stands and looking around and kind of taking inventory, I think they have a little bit more than that kind of 2-to-1 ratio right now. And last year we only took 2 does off the entire property, and then there was only 2 bucks shot off the property. So not a significantly huge harvest. One of the guys hardly hunted last year. So, it is what it is, and how many deer we took. We had a great number of deer on camera, some big ones, quite a few shooters, saw a few shooters besides the one that I ended up taking on that lease. But I think we'll definitely be a little bit more aggressive on the doe harvest going into this year, moving forward. There was a day my buddy was sitting up there, and he said he saw 40 deer one night, and a couple of them are the same does, but he says most of them were all coming from different spots, so they had to be different deer. And I think he said of those 40 deer that he saw, 33 of them were does. 7 of them were bucks, and one was a possible shooter. Couldn't get a real good ID on it, but so the ratio is, I think, a little bit further, tweaked in favor of the does, and I think what everybody had previously guessed. So that's going to be a big target for this fall, is going to be doe harvest for us.
Yeah. I could definitely attest to that as well. On my family farm, it's the same way. I mean, you'll go out to our ag field on the front of the property, and you'll see 80, 90 deer a night in that field, and 8 to 10 of them will be bucks, and the rest of them are fawns, or not fawns, but I'm sorry, does. Mm-hmm. And it's just the doe numbers are just, or the deer numbers in general, but the ratio is just so out of whack. So we try to take a few does every year, and it's helping a little bit, but I know we could be doing more to fix it, but it's just one of those things, man. It's a lot easier said than done. So
it is. The funny thing is you have a mindset, I'm going to go out and shoot a doe today, and something comes up. Like, I had 2 opportunities this year where, I had more than 2 opportunities to shoot does, but I had 2 times where I was like, I'm going to go out and kill a doe. And I saw 2 shooters that day. One of them, I thought it was a different deer, and I waited too long to draw, and then when he turned broadside and then turned his head away and I saw his spread, I was like, oh crap. And it was too late, and I watched him walk away, and I was like, well, that's going to come back to get me. And same thing happened in muzzleloader. I went out to shoot a doe, and I still could have, but I watched one of the biggest deer I've ever seen on the hoof get up right behind my stand when my muzzleloader was tied to my pull string at the base of my tree, and he wandered off about 40 yards and bedded down in the cats and stayed there the entire night. I was covered up with does, could have shot, a few of them, but obviously you're not going to pull the trigger when you got a potential 150 that's bedded about 70 yards away until you can't see anything,
Yep. Especially with a muzzleloader, because you can't really shoot one of those does and wait for him to get up, or maybe and try to reload.
If I would have had my 308, I might have thought about cranking one of those does and then just quick and doing a re-rack and seeing if he was going to budge. But yeah, the muzzleloader, I don't practice my reloading for speed. So
yep. Well, cool, man. I want to tell you thank you for coming on and doing this. We're coming up on an hour here.
Yeah.
I definitely like to get you back on again and maybe jump into some public land stuff, because this year is going to be my first excursion on public land ever. So pick everybody's brain about it, and as much as, especially guys from Michigan. So, but Justin, do you have any lasting questions or thoughts for Matt?
No questions really. It's just, I didn't say anything but yeah and cool and laugh a couple times, I don't think, in the whole hour, but I was just taking it in, because it's so impressive to me how you guys, in a position you are, like in Michigan, and with the resources you have and the sizes of the property you have to work with, like what you guys are doing on these small parcels, like you, Aaron, with your 1 acre. And it's just like, you guys get so resourceful. 10 acres is not a lot, but like you said, it can be done. And Aaron, I bet you wish you had 10 acres, and it's just one of those things where I'm just listening to you guys talk about what you're doing, and it's like, I hope people that hear this podcast just realize that you don't need 200 acres in Illinois or Iowa or Kansas or Missouri to do this kind of stuff. And it's, you create edge habitat, you put food in, you make sure they have everything they need to want to be on your property, and they will be there. Just a matter of whether you're out there when they come through.
Yeah.
I would say you're exactly right about that. You know, like I said, I hit on that point earlier. I've heard that quote more times, and you know, I can count. You know, the quality of the property outweighs the quantity of the property when it's in the right area. You don't have to have 100 acres or anything like that to be successful. You just got to have the right piece in the right place.
Right, and I had somebody at the Iowa Deer Classic, and Aaron and I kind of went down this path about a week ago. I'll keep it short, but somebody had come up and asked me about doe management and like what's the right number of does to shoot if I want to kill does to help manage my herd. And that's kind of a loaded question without knowing the size of your property, the overall number of deer that inhabit that piece of property, year round versus the number that are just coming through during the rut. But I kind of broke it down and equated it to that guy to say, is your property primarily bedding? Is your property primarily a food source? Or are you housing deer that live there year round? And if so, how many? Have you done a census? Have you done a survey? Like, what are you starting with? Like, I can't give you an honest answer without more information. And I think to your point, it's like whether you've got 1 acre, 10 acres, or 50 acres, that your 10 acres might just be, all standing timber. Like you might have hard mass for food, but otherwise, you're looking for cruisers. You're not housing deer. So you just figure out how to use what you have. Like once you can identify why are they here in the first place, and then figure out how to use that to your advantage.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And not to, I know we're running short on time here. Hitting on another thing about that lease is it's a nerve-wracking feeling when you enter into a lease that's not just your own. When I pulled that release trigger and I let that arrow fly on the buck I shot this year off that lease, I was the first person to shoot a buck off that lease this year. And, everybody said, well, okay, everybody knows how to age deer, but when you're doing that and you're fearful of like, oh man, did I shoot the right deer? And then you're second guessing, you're like, oh no, I know that was a big buck. Oh, that was a big buck. I know that was, but the emotions that go through, not just from, your heart and adrenaline, all that stuff. Holy crap, there's a shooter buck in front of me. But then you're like, man, did I make the right move? Are these guys going to be mad at me? Did I just screw myself up for, potentially being on this lease for next year or years to come? So, that's a whole nother stigma for, trying to get into a lease. And that was nothing I had experience with before. So those thoughts raced through my mind about 100 times before I walked up and, held those horns in my hand for the first time.
Yeah. And you can't really go into it thinking about yourself. You got other people to think about as well. I mean, that's a good point. And, my lasting kind of thought, what I'm going to say is on the small property thing, and you both kind of touched on it, is, use your resources as well as you can. And with what you have, like I said, I have 120 acres, but, there's only 4 acres of timber and 1 acre of timber by itself. And that's what I've been really using. Well, the biggest take from a small acre, in my opinion, is hunt it on the right times. Don't overhunt it. If it's your only piece of ground, you can't go out there and hunt it every day. You got to really hunt it on the right times and keep your pressure minimal. And that's how I found success this year. I didn't hunt it very much, and I was able to see, 3 bucks that were 3.5 years old and one that was 4.5 years old. So I would say that'd be my biggest lasting thought on all that. So.
And yeah, I would just echo that, especially for the the small property. I think I hunted in the last 2 seasons at my house. I don't think I've sat in my tree stands at my house more than 6 sits, maybe 8, just because conditions weren't right or I didn't have the deer on the camera that I was hoping for at time of year, whatever else.
Right.
But I think that echoes not just for private small parcel pieces, but state land too. The best success that I've had on the state land have come from either the first or second sits into the areas where I know holds a good deer, and less pressure, less scent. They don't got people walking through there 12 months out of the year, and all of a sudden you start laying scent down. They're going to catch on. Those big ones are going to move out. They're going to get wise to it. So pick and choose your sits. You don't have to be that guy that hunts 50 or 60 days out of a 3-month period. You just have to be that guy that hunts 2 days out of the entire season. But if you choose the right 2 days, you got it made.
For sure, man. Well, cool. Again, I want to thank you for coming on and appreciate you for doing this. And I really want to do it again because I want to talk about your public land excursions, and we'll for sure have you on here soon again.
Yeah, I appreciate it, guys. It was a lot of fun, and anytime you can get on and talk with other guys that are passionate about deer hunting and habitat, always trying to improve themselves as a sportsman and improve the quality of the deer of the areas that they're hunting in, it's always good to bounce ideas back and forth off of those people. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem, man. And I want to thank you again, and we're gonna cut this loose here. So thank you, Matt.
Sounds good. Thanks again, guys.